Start the recording so she doesn't get to it. Okay. I'm glad that you could make it today. I hope that this will give you some new ideas and insights about how to do some things. A few weeks back, when I went and talked to Lynn and said, I want to do something on indirect assessment. And she said, okay. And then she said, wait a second. What is that? Mm-hmm. So, assessment folks, I'm the Director of Academic Assessment, for those of you who don't know me. That's one of the hats I wear. And so I'm always dealing with assessment and that sort of thing. And she's looking at me like, what are you talking about? I'm going, you know what this is. Mm-hmm. But sometimes assessment folks talk a little bit differently than folks that deal with the scholarship of teaching and learning. But we mean some of the same things. We use a lot of the same things. So, when we're looking at this, I am going to be talking about it from an assessment perspective, but it is something that you can use in your classrooms and in your programs that will give you valuable information about your students and what they know and how they know things. So, part of the reason why I was wanting to do this is a few years back, we very quickly across campus put together assessment plans for our majors. And the focus on that was to do direct assessment. What can we collect that show what our students know, where they've demonstrated what they know? And that we did that because our accreditors require that kind of assessment. Now, they'll also let us do indirect assessment as long as we've got the direct assessment in place, and they recognize that it gives valuable information as well. So one of the things I'm hoping to do is to encourage people to think about indirect assessment that they can add to and get more wealth of information from. So when we look at direct assessment, Mary J. Allen describes it as things that require students to display the extent or demonstrate the extent of their knowledge or skill. So what would be some things that we do that require our students to demonstrate their knowledge or skill?
Tests.
We give tests. Can they select the right answer? Lab classes, right? Projects, essays, performances, if we're talking about music or dance or even some EXSS kind of things. Can you do this skill? So we do a number of those sorts of things. And then once they do it, one of us as an expert evaluates it. You are good at it, but you haven't mastered it, or any of the various ways that we might say that. You're at a C level, A level, so we assess it. One of the issues with that direct assessment is it tells us what the students can do, but it doesn't always tell us why they're performing at that level, how they value what they know, what kind of confidence they have in it. I mean, if it's a multiple choice test, they may have guessed. Some students are really good guessers. And some aren't. But it doesn't necessarily tell you how they got to that point. And that's one of the things that indirect assessment can do.
Dr. Peterson, it strikes me
Yes.
when I hear you say that for so many of us, not saying it's right or wrong, but for so many of us, we tend to think, well, they got it right because I did a good job of teaching, or
Yes.
they didn't do well with it because they didn't study well enough.
Yes.
I'm just, pointing that
Yeah,
out.
I mean, and it's one of those parts of being self-reflective as a teacher to think about both of those things. If somebody's not excelling, is it because I haven't presented it in a way that is accessible for them to
Right.
learn, or sometimes they haven't bought the book and they didn't do the homework. It can be either one of those things, or a combination of them. So that's a part of it. I need to stop saying so. That's one of the things when you get onto a camera and you start realizing some of those verbal tics you have. Indirect assessment talks about the learning, but not necessarily demonstrating it. So Mary Allen gives this definition about it. It is of learning. The Middle States Commission on Higher Education states, direct assessment methods demonstrate the actual learning that occurred related to a specific content or skill. Indirect methods reveal characteristics associated with learning, but they only imply the learning has occurred. It doesn't necessarily prove that learning has occurred in all instances. So some kinds of indirect assessment. One kind of indirect assessment could be the end of the grade at the end of a course. Why would I say that that would be indirect assessment? Because it's going to have elements of direct assessment in it, right? It's going to have tests or labs in it. What else might it have in it?
Their attendance, their participation in class.
Attendance, class participation. It may not tell you that I had 16 bonus opportunities that a student could do. Kind of the same thing in terms of graduation rates, or so I can tell you that I have a degree in accounting. I don't, trust me. My husband does. But if I say I've got a degree in accounting, does that mean that you necessarily should hire me to be an auditor? Now, that may be the class that I made a low C in, barely squeaked by. And what I'm really good at is the financial areas of accounting, financial analysis. So there are lots of things that go into that it tells us something about the learning rate, but ability, but it doesn't give us specific information about what they know or what all is included in that. So that's why those would fit under the kind of indirect sorts of things. There are national surveys that serve as kind of an indirect method as well. This is not a national standardized test. This would be a survey. One of the ones that we do at UMHB every 3 years or so is the NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement. And so it looks at how the students perceive their experience here and the kinds of things that they do. On the NSSE last time and again this time, it's got a module about writing programs. And since that's one of our new things that we're working on, it talks about how much the students say that they do writing in classes. And then there's a companion survey called the FESI, the Faculty Survey of Student Engagement, where we say how much writing we have the students do. They don't always match up. But that's part of it. Your first college year, again, they can norm these, you can compare them from one institution or another. It gives you valuable information about how you stack up with other folks or where some weaknesses are. But again, not always real specific information of, you need to know how to do quadrilateral equations. Again, since that doesn't fall off my tongue, you can tell I'm not a math major. I'm actually a history person, so. We also at UMHB, our seniors at graduation do a survey as they go out. It's a local survey that we've developed. And we ask questions about learning experience and leadership experiences and a whole variety of other things that focus mainly on their experiences. Today, for most of it, what we're going to look at is we're going to be looking at kinds of indirect assessment that you could do in your programs and even in your classrooms to kind of give you more of a in-depth and wealth of information about your students and what they're learning and how they're learning it. So one of those kinds of instruments is a reflective essay. You can tell that people like cats on the internet and in the Creative Commons. All of my pictures came from the Creative Commons, licensed to put them wherever you want to. Reflective essays look backward. And they look at the experience and they don't just say, did you do this? But how did you do it? How were you changed by this course or event? To what extent were you influenced or changed by this course or event. So it looks, for me, a lot of times I think indirect assessment lends itself to qualitative assessment. And it can do quantitative, but it lends itself to qualitative. So it can help students to clarify an opinion or get an insight. There are a lot of good history teachers out there, but there are also some really not so good ones. The number of times I've had a student after my course say, you know, I never liked history, but, so they can look back and think about, what was it about my course that was different than the other history courses that they've had? Now, they may get to Dr. Phelan's course and go, oh, that Dr. Peterson, she wasn't great, but you know, but it helps to look back and clarify some of those opinions and insights. You're going to be tending to look for trends or patterns. If somebody is doing a reflective essay and they consistently say, if you're asking about something in your program, there's a course that consistently comes up with regard to a particular skill, then you know that that's working, but you may find that the course you expect to be there isn't there. And that tells you something too. If you're saying, identify a course that does this and how, and the course that you think it's being covered in never shows up, you may have a problem if that's the one place you think that skill is being covered. You can do quantitative analysis with this. It's referred to as content analysis, and so you would look at specific words that come up, and you can do a quantitative sort of thing on that as well. Being a historian, that's not as much my thing. But there are a lot of information that you can get from reflective essays. They can explain to you a lot of times why they performed in a way that they did. You might have a reflective essay that, I do study abroad trips sometimes, and we have them keep a journal, which oftentimes is really kind of a reflective essay. And you read through and you hear, oh, you know, Pisa was just the worst. I can't believe that we went there. Okay. The square with the leaning tower is so cool. But, you know, the student may say, it's horrible, I just can't believe it. And then you get down to the bottom and you find out 2/3 of the people on the trip were sick with what we affectionately call the Venetian flu. I took a study abroad trip with a group of students. We got to Venice, and one by one, 2/3 of the people on the trip, including all 3 sponsors, got sick. The next day we went to Pisa. Okay, so we know why that learning experience wasn't as good, because they get to explain it to us. Rather than just a scale, 1 to 5, what did you think of pizza? Pizza 0. Okay, so it can tell you those sorts of things. In one of your handouts, not the one with all the lines on it, but the other one, I've given you some examples of reflective questions that we use in the history program. Oh, sorry. As a part of our capstone.
Thank you.
And for our purposes, if you look at question 3, it's on the very front page of the second handout. Critical thinking skills. So critical thinking, they're going to write an essay that looks at critical thinking skills include research analysis and effective development of thesis argument. Identify history courses that increased your critical thinking skills and describe specific ways that the course utilized your critical thinking skills. So, what kind of beneficial information does the history department get from that question? What might it tell us?
From the internship performance index?
No, it's on the front page. There's
Oh, here.
on the very front page.
The history classes that maybe were most effective.
That were most effective. We've got one that's called Historical Inquiry, Research and Methods. I can tell you because I'm the one that reads all of these. 90% of our students say something about that course. Maybe 95%. Okay, so we expect that one. But a lot of the students also mention one of Dr. Phelan's upper level courses and the process that she went through making them hone their thesis statement, making sure that they revised their papers, making sure that every source they used was scholarly and that they analyzed it, they just didn't describe. I don't have to sit in Dr. Phelan's class. By the number of times that that comes up, I know she does a good job on that particular part of the skills that, that we want our history majors to get. I'd like to see mine mentioned there a few more times, but you know, it depends on what you're looking at, and my courses come up in different places, but that's, you kind of get some of those ideas. If you have a student that says, you know, I took that historical inquiry class and I just don't see how it related to this at all, then they probably weren't paying a lot of attention. But it can tell you some of those. It can tell you how engaged the student was. If there's a course you know from the history that it does those things, and then they're saying that it just really is not a part of it. So there are a lot of ways that reflective essays can be beneficial. Another method of indirect assessment is self-evaluation. We all know some folks like this, right? Getting a lot of pictures. And there's some that it's the opposite way around, where it's the lion here and there's a little sweet cute pussycat over here, and you know, so we see those differences in how they look at each other. One crucial skill that I think that we can give our students is to be able to effectively self-evaluate. What are you good at? What aren't you good at? What do you need to improve on? Where are you in that? Because every job that they have, once they get out of here, is going to be better if they know how to do that. So giving them some practice about that. Here we help them by giving them a list of what skills we expect them to have, but then hopefully they can start looking at it and starting to think about, if I'm doing this job, what are some of the skills they expect me to have? How do I rate on those kinds of skills? It can tell you, as they do their self-evaluations, something about their level of confidence in the skill that they have. Elizabeth, here I'm going to give a nursing example because I ended up in World Civ with lots of nursing students as they're going through their basic skills class and they're getting ready to do their tests in the simulation lab. And I hear them say, okay, I hope I get this skill to demonstrate. I don't want to have this kind of catheter, or I don't want to do the intubation. I want this. When I get out there into a hospital, I want the nursing student who is confident on intubation. Okay, so where's that, is there a gap between what skill they have? Because some of these nurses, they have the skill, nursing students, they got the skill. But I don't want them hesitating as they're putting in the IV. I want that to be a smooth stick. So it can tell us about that confidence, and it can do some gap analysis for us. There are all kinds of students who walk into my classroom and they say, I can write a good introductory paragraph and thesis statement. And their introductory paragraph says, since the dawn of time, women have been oppressed. That's the end of their thesis statement, introductory paragraph, and they're into the paper. There's a gap that we have to start addressing if you see those kinds of things.
I could see examples of this like after the fact too. When I ask students, how'd you do on an exam or quiz or something that I've given, and they say, oh, I did well, it was easy. Or I ask another student about that same exam, and they may say, this is after the fact too, but they may say things like, I didn't do well on that at all. There was such, and then there are those students whom I ask and I say, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just, and that's
you
after
really,
the fact.
you can have the gap going either direction,
Right.
because I've had students who come into my office, oh, that was a horrible test. I should just drop your class. And I'm like, no, let me grade it first.
Right, yeah.
Because sometimes, maybe because they guessed well on some things, but sometimes they just weren't confident in their answer, and their answer
Right.
really, the core of it was there. They just need to work on, you know, a little here, a little there to you know, kind of round it out. You know, they've never been good in history, and so they're just convinced that they're not going to do well on the test. So that gap in the way you look at things, or how you perceive it, the students perceive it, can go either way. Now, in our history capstone, we also do a self evaluation, and that's at the bottom of the first sheet of the handout.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So do you give this to them pre and at the end, or just at the end?
No, we
after
just do
to
this
see?
at the end. We did at one point try and do pre-test and post-test between historical inquiry and the capstone. But with pre-test, post-test, unless you're gonna match up the student
Right.
to the
Right,
student
yeah.
beginning to the end, you don't really get a very accurate picture of a specific growth. And we know some of our students grow a lot in the program and some don't grow nearly as much. So that is something that we could do, but if we're gonna do that, then to make it the best, we would want to be trying to match those up.
And do you not do it because of anonymity?
The survey that I use in capstone is the last thing that they do on their capstone exam. So in that, they don't have anonymity.
Okay.
But it's not a counted part of the exam. But if we're asking some of the questions here about identifying historical source material and being able to do peer reviews and maintain a thesis statement, those are skills that we say are important to us in the history major. When a history major goes out the door, we want them to be able to do those things. There are lots of other things too, but those are some of the very specific skills that we want them to have. So take a minute with people around you and think about a skill or two that you would want to be able to ask your students about as they were going out of your program. What might be a couple of skills or attitudes that you would want them to be able to evaluate in terms of themselves? Take a minute with folks around you.
For our program or our course? Our program?
You could do it either for your program or your course, but program works.
You know, Professor Tia from business, Dr. Pendergrass from music.
In a class that doesn't need
Music.
college hours.
So what were you thinking?
Skills, I think the ability to evaluate music.
Ah.
So that's one of the things that runs through all of the church music classes. It's a common thread in evaluating music, both text, musically. And so
What does that mean?
So that evaluating.
Yeah, it's so
So being able to evaluate.
non-inclined towards
Well, maybe
music.
theologically looking at text and saying, this text is true, or this text is true for our denomination.
Ah,
versus,
okay,
you know,
okay.
Methodist and Baptist, there's a reason we have two different
Gotcha.
churches. We
Okay.
do things differently. So if I've got a
Okay.
Methodist student that's planning worship like a Baptist,
Okay.
we try to help them out. And then musically, just is it singable? Is it well
Yeah.
written?
No, that's
Or is
good.
it something that's going to be try to be there.
That's fascinating.
But that's one of the, just a common thread that runs through.
That runs
so.
through, that's interesting. What about you,
Walked in at the right time, because I just left, they had a lab project where I gave them 2 new things within it and instructions how to do it. And so I was thinking,
No,
when
they're all about
today,
goals, but the
I'm gonna
goals
ask
is
them,
we really
do you feel more comfortable with the software and how to frame
You know, so they can
these
get
nested
pretty
sequences?
Yeah.
and
Ah, that's
plan?
great.
We'll give you another minute or two.
Also, utility skills we want you to know after you leave our class or graduate. So do you feel more prepared to learn new things on the job?
Ah, that's great.
Yeah, so.
That's a lot.
Well, with technology, there's always something.
Yeah, they,
You have to
If you're a
enjoy
stickler,
that.
you're gonna
Yes,
have
you
problems.
have to enjoy that. That's, you
like,
have
I
to
have to
enjoy
work
that.
through their projects. Like I came in and I was at 6, and then I worked through the project because the software skills to put together healthy. And I just found a couple of tweaks that I had to make in their
But you had to make,
instructions.
okay.
Yeah.
In their instructions,
Mhm.
yeah.
I could think of
Because it was a learning project.
Important to your health.
She's gonna stop us, but I was just thinking how in education. Robert, you need anything? Oh, okay.
All right. So I'm hearing some good ideas out there in terms of what you would want to do for your programs. What about in a classroom setting?
Ah,
If you had a particular class, how might you use a self-assessment or self-evaluation?
Well, you could identify things that a lot of people maybe have common, like areas that they all be a weak in or incomplete, and then you know, can identify things that maybe need to
Yeah,
be reinforced.
If before I did my essay in World Civ, I had them self-assess, how many of you feel like you can write a good introductory paragraph and thesis statement? And if I find out that 50% of them think, I don't know what you're talking about, then it would be a good thing to go back and make sure I cover.
It's like a pulse check.
Yeah, yeah. Another way that this is sometimes used is you can have a student, when they're answering questions on an exam, also rate their level of confidence in their answer.
That's pretty good.
Because then you might find out if they're being honest with you, and but you can find out whether this was just kind of a stab in the dark and they were lucky, whether they're overly confident about what they know. So you can kind of, it gives you more of an insight on where they're standing on the information and how their learning is going. So there are a number of ways that you could use this. You could do it in a one class. It might be a little bit easier to do it at the beginning of class on skills that you want them to have going out of the class, and then again at the end, and make that kind of evaluation. If you want them to be really honest, then you probably need to do this in the kind of an ungraded, low stakes kind of environment. Because if you ask them at the end and they think part of their grade is dependent on me saying that I know how to analyze all scholarly sources, they are probably going to tell you that they know how to analyze all scholarly sources. So that's a part of the mix here as well. Another kind of indirect sort of instrument are surveys. And I've got a number of guidelines about creating surveys to have them be effective. One of them is to start out with simple questions, kind of ease people into it. If you go to the second page of the second handout, it's called the Internship Performance Index. This is actually an instrument that's sent out by the mass communication public relations faculty when they've got people out there doing internships. So it's an internship evaluation, it's a survey that you're sending to the, to the employer because that's a part of what their grade's gonna be. It's a rubric that measures the student performance. It's all of those things. But if you look at that, the first question is about time skills. Are they punctual? Okay, that's a pretty easy one. Do they show up on time or not? So let's ease them in. You get down into the deeper into the document and they ask a little bit more complex, nuanced kinds of evaluative items. But kind of ease folks in so they don't look at the first question and go, oh, this is just gonna be too hard. Level of language, make sure you're using the appropriate level of language. We always get surprised about some of the terms that our students may or may not know. In one World Civ class, I was talking about Henry VIII, always a popular topic. Why it was that he could marry Catherine of Aragon, who had been his sister-in-law. It was because Catherine and the older brother Arthur had never consummated the marriage, and we talked about that. We talked about theological and consummate the marriage, and I finally had one of the students in the front go, what is, so they hadn't had sex. Okay.
No honeymoon.
It was just going right over his head because he didn't understand the language.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure of that. Focus your questions. You can't ask everything you want to ask. True confessions. My alma mater is Texas Lutheran. Used to be college, now a university. Just this last spring, they sent an alumni survey. As a good alumni, I wanted to complete this survey, give them feedback on how my experience had been at TLU and what it was like and how, what I valued, all of those kinds of things. And so I started answering the questions, and I answered questions, and I answered some more questions, and then it kept going. And I finally went to the end of the survey where they had comments, and I said, I'm really willing to give you feedback, but you wore me out.
Yeah.
Too many questions. So you may not be able to ask everything you want. So choose what you really want to know and what you may want to find out in another way or a little bit later. Avoid compound questions. Don't say, can you do peer evaluations and can you do something else all in the same question, because then you don't know what part of it generates the answer. Provide all of the range of options. There have been some times where I've had surveys in presentations where they say, mark which category you fit in best. Are you faculty? Are you administration? Are you? All right. I am Director of Academic Assessment, Associate Dean of Social Science, and a history faculty member. Which am I? Depends on what time of the day it is. So make sure you have all the options there if you really want to get a good sense of what's going on. Clarity, that just makes sense. Of course, you would want to be clear. Try to avoid bias. Sometimes I think about this as like leading the witness. We've heard that 20th century Europe is a really difficult class. What was your experience like with it? Well, they're either going to tell you it's really hard because everyone else thinks it's hard, or it was easy because I'm superior to the rest of you guys. So you have to be careful about that. Trying to stay neutral in your wording and not negative in it. Cultural bias. You also need to be careful about asking demographic information. Particularly if you have a small group, or even within a large group if you have a small group within that. So if I did a survey of the group here and asked for demographic information, and I said, this will be a completely anonymous survey. What's my problem? I have one male in this group. If I ask a gender question, the rest of you guys are anonymous. I didn't know what you said. So you have to be careful about that. And of course on campus, if you do too much in depth, you have to go through the IRB. Okay, if you're not just kind of doing simple surveys that go within your class, you would need to do that. So you have a sample of a survey of an employer. And I gave you all of the pages of it. So it's not a short survey. She's getting in depth about what she wants to know about the skills. If you would, take a moment and look at this survey. And this is for a public relations class. Think about what she's asking and what fits in with the content of public relations. Being able to communicate effectively and promote an image of the company and all of those sorts of things. And what parts of the survey don't reflect skills that are specifically public relations oriented. So we kind of start at the front. Use of resources, time skills, money skills, material and space management, people management skills.
All of them.
Are those public relations?
It's not specific to it.
Not really about that part.
Oh, I see.
Interpersonal skills. Those might be a little bit more associated with a class in public relations. Use of information, you get down there and do you know how to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? Okay, those certainly would be some of the things you would look at. Systems probably would be technology. So we've got some parts that clearly are skills that they should have learned in the major, and then some that aren't. Why do we include the stuff that isn't?
Well, I mean, I think those are what we call soft skills,
Mhm.
and those are also important.
They
I
are.
think they help us to, so some of those are performance kinds of things, but these are also some of those affective domains or skills that they may have. Consistency, I mean, I would want to know all of this.
If you're gonna hire somebody,
Yeah.
right?
If I were gonna hire
If you're gonna hire somebody.
Yeah, basic employee skills, just to be employee, being on time.
Right.
Showing up.
You know, and we've got faculty across campus that don't take roll, if you come into class, whatever, when you're here, that's fine.
Right.
Can you do that on a job? But if you had interns going out and you found out that every time you sent an intern out, they were getting marked down in things like punctuality, timeliness, using their time wisely, you might want to think about whether just letting them come into the class anytime they want sends the right kind of information. Because part of the way that our programs and what we teach in our programs is evaluated is what our majors do when they're out there. Can they get a job? Can they keep a job? Do they give a good impression of UMHB? So those soft skills, that's how I have them in my notes too. Those soft skills are important to us too. And then we also want to know, do you know how to effectively put something out there in the public domain that communicates a positive image of this company or person, that manages a crisis, that does all of those other sorts of things? Now, this, as I said, is a pretty in-depth evaluation. I'm thinking at some point there may be some employers who do sponsor the internship where they're going,
Yeah, I would wanna
You wore me out.
Yeah, you wore me out,
Wore me
exactly.
out.
So, that would be something to think about. I think the things that are being asked are valuable pieces of information. But
It's a lot.
how much is too much, and are we parsing it down too small in some instances? But it's a good example of some of the things that you can do in terms of a survey. And that survey is about a particular student's performance. You can do other kinds of surveys with employers about what kinds of needs do they have. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can design and develop a survey to make it work and be beneficial to you and your program. Are there things, if there's some kind of new media technology out there that you haven't decided to incorporate in your class, but the people who are overseeing the internships consistently mention, then you know that you better get on it. Another way that surveys often are used are in terms of alumni surveys. And one of the things that often happens with an alumni survey is they may send it out at different year intervals. We do a survey of you as you're going out the door, and then we do it again 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. Why would I be interested in what a student who graduated 5 or 10 years ago has to say about their coursework and their experiences at UNHB?
They've been out there in the working world.
And yeah, has it made a difference in them? And
Well,
maybe
they've got
what
a lot
level
more
of impact?
experience and can articulate probably a bit better about what was lacking in a program or what was most beneficial.
Perspective.
Yeah.
There may be a course that they just loved when they were in the program, and then they get out in the workforce and find,
Yeah.
I just don't use that. Or a course that they thought was so difficult. Why did you make me take that course? The last place I was over business for a little while, and all business majors had to take Intro to Finance. Even the marketing folks, even the management folks, and I always thought business folks, all of them were good at math. My husband's an accountant, he's good at math. I figured all business folks were good at math. Oh, not so much. There are parts of, some folks are going into business and not thinking that that's part of what they need. And so Intro to Finance was considered a killer course. But then when they got out there and they are doing their marketing and they have to deal with budgets and what's going to be the return on our marketing dollars and all of those sorts of things, well, maybe it wasn't so bad. So you get a different kind of, the perspective, the way that things are used are going to be
Of course,
different.
the only bad thing about that is by then they've marked down that poor business, those poor business professors on how the class and everything.
Yeah,
You know.
and it's,
Yeah, so.
I think we all recognize that some classes are tougher than others, and
Right.
sometimes those classes are harder to get good student
Yeah.
ratings on,
Yeah.
because they're tough, and they have to be tough. I mean, I've talked with Ada Sapp, and I said, I really want your nurses, when they get out of here, to be able to calculate medical dosages right, because I don't want them to miscalculate on me. And so there can be things that are difficult, but they just have to have them. The payoff's a little bit longer down the road.
Yeah.
So, if we're looking at indirect assessment, some of the weaknesses is that if we're dealing with self-evaluation, self-reflection, reflective essays, some folks just don't always know what they know and what they don't know. That gap. They think they're good at something, but they really aren't. Or this does rely on how forthright the people are going to be if you're doing self-analysis. And for some people at particular stages of life, it's just too hard. They're just not ready for it. So there can be a gap. There can be difficulties in gaining validity, and that has to do with the numbers of responses that you're getting in, the circumstances of those responses, the way that you do your analysis of those responses. some of the things about that I'm saying about validity would also have some weakness if you're talking about direct assessment. If you only have 3 students who take your capstone exam and one of them just doesn't care, just circles, you know, A all the way down, your numbers look like, well, only 67% of your students know anything. Okay, so numbers are always crucial in terms of validity. Evaluating reflective essays, narrative survey results, all of those sorts of things can be very time consuming. There is not a Scantron machine to run it through. Well, actually on some of the content analysis, there is a machine you can run some of that stuff through. But in general, when you're doing this, it's somebody who is laboring and counting and circling the words or the responses to certain things. So it can be quite labor intensive. But there are also some strengths. I found a Popeye, but it's actually, that's ensalada verde. So I found a Spanish Popeye.
Yeah, there you go.
For strengths. Strengths, it can give you insight into your students' decision making. Sometimes as they're reflecting, they're going to say, I didn't even try that assignment because I just knew I couldn't do it. Or, yeah, I knew that there was tutoring for that class, but I didn't go because I knew that I could handle the information. Both of those may be completely inaccurate statements, but it gives you insight into that, into why some of the times the students are doing what they're doing and how they're doing. It can elicit unanticipated results. One of the ways that you can use kind of the reflective sorts of things in your classroom is like through minute papers at the end of the class. What did you learn in this class that you didn't know coming in? Okay, so that gives them a really quick backward look. You can ask them, what do you think after this class are the 3 most important reasons that Buddhism broke off from Hinduism? And I look at that, and the unanticipated result is Buddhism broke off from Hinduism because Hinduism was clearly a heathen pagan religion because it has so many gods. Like, well, not exactly. Okay, so you get sometimes unanticipated results, but it can tell you where some of those gaps are and what you need to go back and figure out how to address. You may find out that something that you're teaching goes over really well, and so you need to keep doing that because it got the message across to the students. Or you can find out, well, that method doesn't work. Based on that particular class, a particular student, it can help you to be able to reach out to them. And they're really effective at being able to give you some ideas about the perspectives that your students have while they're going through the classes, their attitudes, the depth that they're feeling or changing while they're going through it. So it can give you some real fast ways to respond to what's going on in their head, not just the little bits that come out as you go along. So we're going to have to keep doing direct assessment for the accreditation for our classrooms. We are going to continue to do direct assessment, but we can add some aspects of indirect assessment and add some wealth and some depth to the information that we're getting and get some of those soft skills, some of those areas that oftentimes lead to a great deal of satisfaction in what we're doing because it tells us a little bit more about how we're touching our students. So, you guys have any questions about what we've been talking about or how you could use it in your classrooms?
I really like it. I like what you shared with us today, and I'm kind of stuck on, I wrote a couple of research ideas down, but I also am really stuck on thinking about knowing students, knowing their weaknesses
Mhm.
or their strengths.
Right.
And just thinking about, psychology-wise, how that's a pretty high level of self-actualization that a lot of people, we would hope most college graduates would have that. I want to say all, but even when you think about it, the world, there's such a small population of people, and you don't, that doesn't denote that you haven't reached self-actualization because you don't have a college degree.
No, I agree.
But yeah, it is something that we can teach students to do. That is a skill.
Well, we've all known somebody who just wasn't very self-aware.
Right,
Sometimes it's the person who really, really knows their stuff, but
right.
yeah, manages to alienate everyone that they talk to. And if they haven't been taught how to think about
Right.
what they're doing and what might be hindering, this is what I know I'm strong at, this is what I'm not strong at, I need to get help with that. It is one of those skills that we can teach that's a life skill,
Yeah,
but it can also help us in what we do in our classrooms and in our programs
Yeah.
to make those better, and to look at different aspects of it. All right. Well, thank you all
Thank
for
you so
coming.
much.
Very good.
Thank you.